Hello, everyone. My name is Mike. I'm a physical therapist and your host of the Health Me podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any updates. What's up, everyone? Mike here, back with another episode for you guys to discuss the future of healthcare. This week's episode peeks behind the curtain of Web 3.0 as we discuss physical therapy in the metaverse. You heard me right. Our conversation this week highlights what exactly the metaverse is, how to access it, and the ways our guest is already beginning to see its application brought to life. Our conversation today will be through the lens of a fellow physical therapist who is working very closely with the development and genesis of this new startup technology company. Within our discussion today, we go over what surprised our fellow physical therapists the most about this new technology and the impact or potential this technology has. Lastly, I ask questions on some of the barriers to this new technology, how far away we are from virtual clinics, and how we may be able to mimic sports in the metaverse as a way to rehab from an injury. As always, links for everything for my guests and what we talk about today will be in the show notes, and timestamps for each part will be provided as well. If you attended CSM or the National Conference of Physical Therapy, you may have seen them there already, but here's my conversation with Dr. Sean Wells. Thinking about your career and your journey toward who you become as a clinician, I'm sure you have many moments of hard work, but also determination. And during that time, there's also been moments of fun. And so to begin, as a way of highlighting your career as a clinician, a business owner, as well as a researcher and so on, I wanted to ask, what part of your journey would you say you were having the most fun?
Well, that's a tough question. I liked PT school a lot. I really enjoyed the aspect of doing the biological research, as well as doing some TA work, so a little bit of teaching, and then obviously learning in the clinical practice. So that was a fun time. But as I look back in my career, like every 5 years, I make a small change, and like each year, each of those segments, it seems like it gets better and better. So that's a tough question, because I really enjoy where I'm at now, because I'm still practicing. Well, I guess I wasn't practicing at PT school, but internships, clinicals. I'm practicing, I'm teaching, and I'm doing some advising and research still a little bit. So that's a lot of fun. So that's a tough question. I would argue between PT school or right now, it's probably been the most fun part of my life.
Right. And right now, what you're working on is with this company called Immergo Labs. And what they're really trying to do is change the physical therapy space into this new realm of Web 3.0 and so on. So maybe just give a description of the company that you're working with and part of the journey that you're excited about.
Sure. So Immergo, what we plan to do with Immergo is to take physical therapy to the metaverse. And the big push there is that a lot of people during COVID, we all know this, we're on Zoom calls like this, and we're trying to measure joint range of motion and hoping that we can understand how strong someone is by looking at the video. Unfortunately, that proposed a lot of limitations and issues with physical therapists. And so we saw a need there, and we also see the space, the metaverse space, growing and getting more popular, and more people will be adopting and using it. So Immergo is taking basically physical therapy into the metaverse. So instead of having to be on a video, you can be in a three-dimensional space, walk around the patient, have instantaneous range of motion and torque measures, and just make telehealth even better. Because as we know, there's definitely some perks with it, but there's some substantial drawbacks. So it's an exciting group to be involved with right now.
Well, certainly trying to completely reimagine or at least mimic the physical therapy experience is really difficult, especially over telehealth. And I can imagine I had one or two telehealth visits that I did during COVID, and it was challenging. You mean trying to build a connection with the patient, trying to make sure that you're getting accurate assessments, and also even trying to get objective clinical data. I mean, if you're trying to watch someone jump or squat or, whatever they may be, it's going to be incredibly difficult unless you're literally right in front of that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. I found it out myself, I did several telehealth visits, and it turned out to be, all right, take the camera and tilt it this. Okay, now move this down and up, and you're constantly, it's quite a nuisance. So with our platform, we hope to not eliminate Zoom or, not eliminate Google Chat altogether, or whatever you're using, DocMe. It's really to make our care that much better. And the goal is also, should be really clear, is not to get rid of physical therapists. I know we've had a few people ask me I just had lunch with Bob Rowe. He's the president of our orthopedic section a couple days ago. And he said, do you guys plan to like just get rid of PTs altogether, you know, with like machine learning and stuff down the road? I said, no, the plan for this company is to make our physical therapy care even better and put us in control of that and not let some other companies sort of eliminate us. So that's one other thing I want to be clear up front on.
Yeah, certainly. And you're trying to basically highlight or at least exemplify what physical therapists already do. You don't really want to completely get rid of it because I don't think you're going to be able to, right? Unless there's some super, you know, in the future, there's going to be some kind of like robot that's going to be able to mimic the way that a brain operates. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to try to completely replace that.
Absolutely. I agree.
And the other part about this is really interesting is that I've thought that COVID, you know, I think early on, a lot of people have thought of all the negatives that had kind of arisen from this, but it seems like this is kind of a positive in the sense that where we're, you know, like you said, Zoom is really difficult. Trying to get into a clinic can be really difficult. Some people, you know, are scared and so on, but it seems like this is almost niched out a lot of great opportunities for people to grow and innovate and become better and better. So what I really want to highlight is basically as we move forward, I want to make a description as like what the metaverse is, because people have seen this more and more, and they're trying to understand exactly like what this whole Web3 is, what is NFT and so on. So maybe let's describe exactly what the metaverse is and how does one access it?
Sure. So the metaverse, that term was really coined by Meta, who now owns Facebook. But if you can imagine right now, like where we're chatting or when I go online to my Gmail account, for instance, everything is in a two-dimensional format. So the metaverse, in a sense, is actually like a three-dimensional space where you can meet somebody typically through avatars. There can be some form of interactions. Obviously, if I touch your hand, you touch my hand, we get haptic feedback. I can feel, it's almost like I'm feeling you and you're feeling me, although we're technically not touching each other. So as PTs, we kind of look at that and go, oh, that's kind of cool, but it's also like not the same as doing manual therapy. And obviously there's some limitations with that, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but the metaverse is that three-dimensional space and it's expanding. We actually have, if you can imagine, like websites, which are almost like storefronts and locations within the cloud where the metaverse is sort of stored and lives. And our goal is to roll out potentially clinics, and maybe not for us particularly, but maybe PTs can have their own quote metaverse type clinic where they can utilize our platform and patients can meet there and see the PT, be treated, be examined. And it's a promising idea. And I think the metaverse in a way is like, I kind of describe it to some of my older clients, like the internet, but in 3D. And for them, they kind of get an idea like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand that. But it's immersive, and that's something that else is important. So like, as I come into like my dashboard, just like when you walk into your desk, I look to my left and there's my notepad. I look to the right, there's my, my earbud case. As I turn around, there's the light. Versus when you go to your Gmail account, it's just the one Gmail page is all you're looking at. So I think with the metaverse and it being immersive, you will be able to be more efficient, get things done, be able to check on multiple things, have multiple images, and be able to manage a lot more than you can just on a flat desktop screen. So I think there's some promise with the metaverse, and I think that's a good description. I hope I nailed it.
No, you did really. I like that description. I haven't heard it described like that, where it's like three-dimensional. I think that's a great way to conceptualize it. And I've always tried to describe it as like kind of like the Ready Player One kind of idea, where you're going into this whole new world and it's all, there's so much new technology in this area, but it's difficult to describe, especially to older people. I'm sure it's been a challenge to try to describe what's actually going on and be like, what are you talking about?
Absolutely. It is a little tricky, especially when you throw that word around, metaverse. And we saw that at CSM. We were just at CSM last month, and we said, we're taking physical therapy to the metaverse. And I felt like, there were some younger and some older people kind of looking at us like, well, what is the metaverse? And I'm like, okay, well, let's have the conversation. So
did you get any of those like, good luck, buddy? Like kind of skeptical?
For the most part, no. Oh, well, you had some skeptical people. There was a few people like, I remember that Oculus thing. And you would ask about how you access it. Probably one of the more common ways people are accessing the metaverse is through the Oculus Rift, which is a meta product. I remember accessing it years ago, and I thought this is really cool. And we had a few PTs kind of chime in and say that too. Oh, I remember that. That's how you play video games. And it's like, yeah, that's how we play video games. But now people are doing a lot of other things. They're, looking at their stocks through the headset, right? They're doing more than just playing video games. And with us, we're really trying to push that envelope for PT. So to me, I look at it as an opportunity. But there are other platforms and other VR headsets that are out there. I think the Oculus has really gotten a market share. Like they've really pigeonholed the market. And from my understanding, they're going to be rolling out another group of headsets with their Project Cambria. Those headsets will be a little bit more expensive. I think like $500-$600 versus right now, like you can buy an Oculus Rift headset for about $300.
Yeah.
So it'll be a little bit more expensive, but they reportedly have more bells and whistles. So it's exciting. I don't know exactly the details of what they're going to put in it, but there's all sorts of blogs and theories online of what they're going to integrate. So it's exciting. I think every rendition, it's only going to get better, and those older headsets are only going to get cheaper. So like the adoption rate is it's going to go up.
Well, just like TVs, right? They got really, really cheap, really fast, right? Like my friend was telling me actually yesterday, he was saying like, I was looking at this 80-inch TV and it was like $1,000. And I remember my brother, when he came back from the military, he bought like a 42 or like a 46-inch TV for like $1,200. I was like, he got gypped,
Yeah.
But certainly makes it easier to be accessible for patients. And also, almost like kudos to Mark to look like 6 to 8 years in the future to buy Oculus and build this brand off of this, because they had overcome the company that long ago. And so it's interesting that they had been thinking about that long ago, where they made that initial investment to build what they have now.
Yeah, it's impressive, the foresight. And I know Google has tried a little bit with their glasses. That kind of didn't really take off. Meta just rolled out their version of Ray-Bans, which you can snap photos with and things. Those are pretty cool. But I know Google's next big push, I think, is more augmented reality. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays into it, because it's really not true virtual reality or in that metaverse space. It's more it's in life, but it's more like heads-up display, kind of like what a pilot would have, which seems pretty novel and very cool too. I don't know how far it'll go, but we'll see. That's kind of nice to see the competition is out there too, because more competition, the more you push and get your product better. So it's exciting next few years.
Yeah, and certainly you guys are going to be pushing into that a little bit too as well. I'm sure there's going to be other companies trying to do similar things as more and more people learn about it. So I'm sure you guys are going to start seeing more and more competition as you see success.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. We've been monitoring competitors, and there's definitely a few that are out there. We have Mind VR. Their focus is more neurological rehab. I'd say the way we're different than them is that we're trying to promote PTs and patients to have their own headset and they can utilize it anywhere. Whereas with Mind VR, it's still very like clinic based, and you have to be wired into a computer, and that can have some limitations for clients, because that means that maybe they can't. They have to go to their home. They have to leave their home, or if they're traveling, they can't just bring this giant laptop and a cord and everything. Whereas with an Oculus Rift, you just have this little box and you bring it with you and you're good to go. Another company is Virtualis. Virtualis is based out of France, and they've done some really good stuff. We saw them at CSM. We talked to them for like hours. They're like, "Oh, we love what you're doing." But again, a lot of their stuff involves a lot. It's equipment intensive, so they have like a force platform and everything. So we've done the market research, and we see that there's a need, and that people want this too from our surveys, not only PTs, but also like customers and clients. And we're continually doing more research on that market area, because as we do more what we call customer discovery, we're finding kind of confirming what our initial hunch was, but more importantly, that there's still demand, because there is a discussion like, well, once COVID dies off, like we don't need to use virtual reality, or we don't need telehealth anymore. And I'm like, actually, there's been a lot of people who've really enjoyed telehealth. And moreover, I'm sure we'll talk about this later too, we see it as an opportunity for PTs to provide like a hybrid type model too. Mm-hmm. So instead of just like all my care is being virtual, it's in person, maybe like say evaluation, hand touching, looking, evaluating. And then second session might be like virtual. And I think that's kind of maybe how we can move and increase adoption rate too, is not just by telling PTs they have to use our product for only in all their sessions, because I don't know if that will really work for a lot of PTs, particularly in such a physical profession.
Well, I love that you're a clinician and you're actually like taking what a lot of these guys are trying to implement, and you're thinking like, well, I don't know if that's going to work, or like this is going to work. And I kind of wanted to get your take. Like, what was your first experience using Immergo Labs, or at least the company that you're working with? And maybe did you have any biases going into it? Like, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so to be brutally honest, again, my perception with Oculus was years ago, dodging a bullet in slow motion. I thought that was really cool. Working in the lab and setting up things in this like virtual space, I thought that was really cool. So that was sort of my perception of like, okay, this is all going to be really cartoonish and avatarish. But once I got into we have a virtual lab and this three-dimensional space. We have a mirror, and I could watch myself moving my arms and how accurate it was. I was really blown away by what they had, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's just like a rough copy. We're not even into like honing in some of the algorithms and things yet." And I'm going, "Really? I mean, this is amazing." This was the end of last year. So since then, we've now developed our minimal viable product with a dashboard and everything, and built in a lot of the algorithms and things from a lot of the research that Mike and Aviv have been working on, and Ash too. So they've been working real hard on that. And so, yeah, overall, I was definitely impressed. And I kept saying, I want to see more. And of course, I tend to be a little impatient. So I'm like, well, when can I want to see it now. Like, I want to see range of motion measurements. I want to see instantaneous torque. And they're just like, Sean, like we have time. Like we're working on it. I'm like, okay, all right. Well, what else are you doing? Oh, you're finishing a PhD. I get it. That's why you're busy.
Yeah, they're probably just doing this on the side, right? Just trying to not on the side, but definitely a priority in their life. And it's, I'm sure, in addition to something else that they're already doing.
Yeah, I mean, Aviv, like he's already got like 24 international publications. I mean, Ash is coming not too far behind him with several robotic studies. And then Michael too, he's done his bachelor's in exercise science. So he's got some force plate data and things he's done. So these guys are really well versed in research, and Mike got his PhD. Ash is still working on his. So yeah, they're working both in that scholastic environment as well as trying to balance their time with this startup.
Now, did you have a background in technology at all, perhaps with just robotics or force plate and so on?
So most of my technology background, I did when I was teaching at Florida Gulf Coast University. I did a couple studies, one in the Alter G, one using an accelerometer type a device trying to measure performance in fencers with their stabbing motion. So I'd say like I don't have a technical training or background in the sense of like I didn't go to school for it, but I've always had an interest, and I'm also a problem solver. So if something like with a study design of like the fencers, I'm like, all right, I don't really know everything, so I need to branch out. And I found the bioengineering department was amazingly smart, and like we worked together on this project, and it turned out to be a nice little undergraduate research study for a couple of our AT and exercise science students. It was a lot of fun. So I guess I look at it and go, if there's a problem or something, I can find a tech solution for it. That's great, especially if it's become automated and I can kind of forget about it and let it do its thing. So yeah, I've always had a passion, and in my house, I've got, smart switches and smart this, and my mom and dad come, and they're in their 70s, and they're like, Sean, the blinds just open automatically. I said, yeah, I have them, automated and stuff. And so to them, it's just, how does this happen? How do you get this set? And so I'm usually coaching them along the process. So I'd say overall, like wouldn't say I don't have a certification in technology or anything, but I've always had a passion. I've always had an interest, and especially when it comes to solving problems, technology has definitely been there for me as well. So
I think you missed a great opportunity to convince your parents that maybe there was ghosts in the house. I think that would have been a fun time, right? to try to be totally. Like, I don't know. I could keep seeing it too.
Totally. And setting up the Google Nest in the center of the kitchen has definitely been an interesting moment with my 9-year-old who's, telling it to do all sorts of things, like turn on the sprinkler, turn on the, this, that. This is like, things are going up and down and on and off. So it's been comical. Let's say that.
And the neighbors are looking across the street like, what the hell is going on in the house?
Exactly. Yeah. It's possessed.
Right. Well, back to getting into the metaverse. So for patients who are, they're using this for the first time, when they come into the metaverse, I guess, do you have your own avatar? Do you have to create your own version of yourself to go and access the clinic?
Sure. So that's something we're looking at. We have ability to switch avatars right now. So you can utilize like a skeleton avatar if you don't want like a specific human. We have a female avatar, male avatar, kind of a nondescript avatar. So you can kind of change that a little bit. And so I know that Ash has mentioned, he's our CTO. would love to get an integrated software. People will take photos of themselves, and there's integration that we can use to then basically take that picture and translate it into an avatar that looks very much like that person. Obviously, the person would need to consent to getting their photo taken and having that all transcribed. But that's something we're looking at seriously. And the other component we're also looking at is using volumetrics, which is setting up some cameras and maybe allowing that person, like from several camera angles or maybe even with their phone, sort of doing a three-dimensional scan or at least a partial scan of their body to give us an idea of their overall body, like body type, and to sort of optimize the avatar to look like them. Ultimately, for us, we're not exactly worried about how perfect the avatar looks. We're more worried about getting accurate, valid, and reliable data from the motions and from our sensors. And that's been our biggest focus right now. So if it looks pretty, obviously people will really like it, but at the same token, we don't want to just have something that looks pretty, but isn't really measurable for clinicians, because that's one of those key metrics that we found in our, with our NSF grant and our SBIR grant, was that interviewing PTs, they said, we need ability to get accurate objective data, because right now we can't. When I say flex your elbow on the screen, I go, it looks like 120, I can't tell. And now, okay, elevate, okay, that looks like 160. And so if we can get really accurate measurements, that was really a high priority for PTs. And I think that's where our focus has been. And the avatars we got some selections, but I think we're only going to get that better as we kind of get the whole package together.
And how is the data being collected? I know you may not be able to get into specifics, but the idea is there's a data capturing device, whether it be your phone, and then you're going to have the Oculus Rift on. Is that generally how it's going to work?
So when to use our Immergo platform, all you'd have to do is put the Oculus Rift headset on and then have the two controllers in the hands. So currently we're doing upper extremity only. We're working, our phase 2 is going to be lower extremity and spine and balance. So we're going to kind of go down from the upper extremity. They don't need their cell phone. That's not a requirement right now. That may come into play later on. We'll have to see. And then in terms of how we're capturing data, we're utilizing machine learning, and we're using artificial intelligence to help us generate algorithms and get really specific and accurate information. So I think our standard error of measure, I wrote it down on the notebook the other day, it's ridiculously low. Like, with inclinometers, it's 2 degrees, goniometers like 5 degrees. I think talking with Mike the other day, our CEO, he said they have it down to like 0.02 degrees, something like that. I'm looking at my notes. Wow. It's really small. It's smaller than even what we would get clinically. So that being said, I have a lot of confidence in their machine learning and their processes, and we're going to continue to validate and find reliability studies. That's kind of our next big push, is to really prove that.
And obviously getting objective data is really important, but one thing I was going to ask you to see, what is it able to identify or at least objectively note the quality of motion? You can say like, okay, this is 160 degrees or this is 180 degrees, but the quality in which that motion or how that person got that arm up there may dictate how you want to progress with an exercise program. So I guess maybe is it also noting the quality of motion, or are you seeing that in the numbers? I suppose, how are you dictating or at least quantifying quality?
Sure. So with the avatar, we're basically trying to match the image of whatever the avatar is doing with exactly what the patient's arm is doing. So you would actually see it in that three-dimensional space. So if someone lifts their arm up and then suddenly stutters, our system is capable of capturing that stutter within the movement. Now, are you going to be able to actually identify the exact upward rotation of the scapula that's moving? Probably not. And that's where, there's some limitations within that, because to capture every small, minute, posterior rotation of the SC joint or something like that, we would have to have a sensor, an IMU, like at every single point. And then we're looking at like cost and how expensive that will be and the barrier to entry, et cetera. So that is obviously a limitation, is looking at some of those smaller, minute details. So I would argue that we can capture some of it, especially from a gross movement standpoint, but not some of those finer details. And again, that's kind of why we go back to like, this probably won't work perfectly as a standalone option. As a hybrid option, it might work really well. Or if it is a standalone option, you're working with like gross movements, things that are maybe not as niche and finite. I hope that answers your question. I know that's not
No,
probably
yeah, it does.
the best answer you want to hear, but I mean, we have
It's
to be realistic with what we're measuring.
100%. Yeah. And I was going to say, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get every single joint. And even like perhaps when we were talking about overhead motion, there's a lot of things that we're looking at. Not only are we looking at the shoulder, but we're also looking what the neck's doing. What is the low back doing? What is your, what are the other parts that are moving? And I'm curious to know how it's going to be able to take in all that data information and interpret that so that way we can visualize it and see it. You had mentioned that you're going to be seeing it in a 3D plane, but will there be an option to also look at the objective data where you're seeing perhaps from 0 to 180 degrees at which rate you're able to seeing? So like, for instance, typical scapulohumeral rhythm, it's a 2-to-1 ratio with the glenohumeral joint and the scapula. So basically for every 2 degrees of glenohumeral motion, you get 1 degree of scapular motion. And so are you going to be able to see that objective data of like, oh, maybe there's an issue with that?
So like, for instance, like looking at just glenohumeral flexion, for instance, yeah, the PT has the ability to toggle a graph and see the instantaneous range of motion in the arc. And so you can maybe see like there's a flat part and then a sudden spike, or, a sudden spike and then a flattening off, like with someone who's got like an upper trap dominant pattern. So yeah, you'll be able to see that. Now, would you be able to tease out exactly is it scapular motion versus glenohumeral motion? That right now, I'm not totally sure if we have those capabilities yet. If we're trying to think of with our data capturing and our models at this point, I don't believe we have that capability, but I don't think it's that hard. We just have to have some sensors to measure it. And we're looking at different wearable technology that maybe we can integrate with that, but that's a little bit down the road. But right now, you can imagine like if I was doing a consult with you and you said, Sean, elevate your arm, you would see this and go, okay, that looks pretty good. It looks like about 175. You could toggle right on the screen and go, that's 175. Okay, now let's look at strength. Can you put your palm up? Let's look at strength and provide resistance, and we can actually get an idea of torque too and how much resistance is there based on the machine learning and the algorithms that we run. So that to me is pretty amazing and pretty cool too.
Yeah, you're almost bringing like a small biomechanical lab at home so people can utilize it and you can get really objective data.
Absolutely. It's pretty amazing. And the headset's what, $300? So, people buy iPhones that are $1,000. It's not a really difficult buy-in. And so for a clinician too, to have one, you're looking at, all right, $600. And our target market really right now, as we start off, is probably more like cash-based and concierge PTs and sports PTs, because we know that sports, they're always traveling. And so having that ability to have a hybrid model works, and cash PTs too. We don't have that barrier to entry with like insurance and having all those issues like verifying like treatments over telehealth and stuff. So that's kind of our primary market we're really focusing in on. And based on our surveys from our phase 1 grant with NSF, that was a market that we saw was viable and has room for growth too.
Have you been using it with patients at all? And like, what's been your experience with it?
At this point, I've used it with a couple. One of our other advisors had some issues with shoulder problems, so we've looked at that. But I haven't rolled it out officially with any of my patients yet. We're actually ordering some more headsets, and my goal is to start utilizing it with some of my patients so we can start working out some of those kinks. And I have 3 PTs in Naples that are working for me, and I'm getting them some headsets as well, and going to have them start seeing some patients with it as well, so we can gather more data, but also work out some of those, kinks and those pain points that, comes with rolling out an MVP.
For sure. And, you mentioned the price point for the Oculus, which isn't too bad, but for some it may be a lot. But maybe an additional barrier aside from money would be just wearing it overall, I guess. Have there been some negatives or at least some issues with wearing the headset in a 3-dimensional space? Have patients complained, or have you noticed issues with wearing it?
That's you bring up a good point. So in a small subset of the population, and when we looked at our the people that when we had 40 PTs go through, our PT students go through our trial at CSM, and we had a small subset of the population, it's probably less than 10%, had some dizziness or kind of feeling of wooziness a little bit. And that sometimes can be a factor of adjusting the eye distance. So they're almost like Fresnel lenses inside. And so you have to make sure that they're matched really well. And so sometimes I'm sure with CSM is real busy at Technopalooza. Maybe we weren't able to adjust it well, or some people are just their sensory organization is just off a little bit. It doesn't quite match up well. And so that is one issue. The other issue is comfort too. So, we would obviously recommend different padding and things. Kind of the base model it's nice. It's got some foam and stuff, but they have better, softer pads and straps that have padding. In fact, all the team have like really nice straps and things, and it's adjustable and ergonomic and things. It's much better than just the base elastic that you put on. So those are some of the barriers I would say with wearing the device.
Well, and certainly it allows you to, certainly there's always going to be issues with technical things that you're not going to be able, it's not really your issue, right? It's more of the company's issue to try and figure out, like, to help aid with that, right? Like Meta and all these other companies are going to be coming out with new devices that will be more comfortable, or this one's tailored to you, and so on. So I'm sure as that becomes more competition and people really strive for like comfort and accessibility, it may not even be an issue at all.
Correct. Yeah, they said, I know that's something that we're really trying to work on with this next the Cambria project, was to really get rid of that the nauseated and dizziness feeling. It's not a huge group of or population that it affects, but it's something they obviously don't want. It's not really a good feeling to be, having a headset on in a different world and kind of dizzy and woozy.
Well, I'm just thinking about this now, and you said that perhaps people in sports would be able to utilize this as well. And a very common injury in sports is concussion. Are there ideas maybe to use that as a way to get patients back into like some kind of concussion protocol with eye tracking, or even just like a low grade activity, so that way they can start progressing towards real life exercises?
Sure. So something like eye tracking and things, I believe on our roadmap, it's something like phase 3, like our phase 2 big focus again is lower extremity, spine and balance. But so kind of a little further down the road, we'll probably look at that. But one thing we were thinking about with sports is utilizing it because it's got the capability of capturing data so quickly. Like, all right, you can do a simple movement screening, arms overhead, all right, go into a squat, duck walk, that sort of thing. And boom, you've captured all this data and joint torques in a moment. Now someone's gone out, they take a hit, right? And now we say, are they ready to go back? Run them through the screening again. And you can kind of compare and contrast the two data sets pretty quickly. So we're looking at it as an opportunity to work with several sports PTs and professional organizations to really utilize it as a screening or almost surveillance type tool. Obviously, it's not going to replace good old common sense and good field knowledge when you're out there and looking at the athlete on the field or in the athletic training room. But you really need to look at this as just an additional tool. So,
but definitely makes our job easier, and it gets objective numbers to maybe like what we're seeing, and also can provide patient feedback and be like, listen, this is where you were before, but now you're able to do this. And that's super powerful, because when patients can see the progress, they're like, okay, now this is working. Let's continue working on this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's your graph before, here's your graph afterwards. It's pretty cool. And they're in the immersive environment, can see it with you. That's even cooler.
Well, we're discussing like analysis of data and bringing objectivity to the profession of physical therapy. Do you think that physical therapists will need to get some more formal training in maybe like biomechanic lab analysis, data analysis? I guess, like, what are your thoughts in physical therapists trying to adopt more of this data analysis role? Because we do get a superficial understanding, and sometimes a really in-depth understanding, depending on your background, with some of this stuff, but not everybody does. And so you think there's going to need to be a standardization with understanding data and interpreting results, so that way you can interpret it into your own clinic? Or I guess, like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you bring up some good points there. And I think obviously our goal isn't to go out and influence CAPT to start changing everything to meet our needs. But I think some of it is like clinical information that PTs are already utilizing. So like range of motion, and maybe torque isn't, because like not a lot of PTs have handheld dynamometers, right? We're manual muscle testing people and kind of grading as best we can, and then doing functional tests to say, okay, the athlete jumped 20 centimeters, now they jumped 25. So I think we're already kind of doing some of the data mining, maybe not as streamlined and as such copious amounts of information. But I think the one area that we're trying to really approach too is creating our own normative standards within our system. So we'd like to say, all right, like for our balanced population, like they get into our system and we run them through a couple of movements. Like, all right, stand with your feet together, like a Romberg type position, right? And we note the amount of sway they have. And so within our system, we can say, all right, this patient's been identified to have X amount of sway. They are at a high fall risk and may not be appropriate for our system. So that's important for us, obviously, to screen out people and say, hey, listen, you're at a high fall risk. We may not be able to move forward with utilizing our technology, or, you're at a moderate fall risk, understand that when you do this, you need to have a caregiver nearby, or like do it in a corner, or we're doing some other ways of promoting it to be safe. Same thing with like strength or torque. We're looking at, all right, here's your involved side and non-involved side, and there's a severe deficit, kind of like we've seen with ACL protocols, right? Like, they're at a, more than 10% deficit from side to side. We might have some issues with that ACL reconstruction. That person may not be strong enough. So we're hoping to kind of roll out some of our own normative standards for our system, so that PTs can have it already sort of built in, or caked into the system, so they're not having to analyze overly, and go, oh gosh, what was the MCID on that again? I don't remember. We'll hope to have it caked into the system and make their job a little easier too.
Do you think that it may bring out some things that we're doing wrong as a profession? I can imagine, like, if you're getting some of this artificial intelligence and all this information coming in, there's going to be at some point where the profession is going to be like, we've been doing this right. And that the information from the technology is going to be like, no, you have not. And do you think that this will be ultimately a good thing, but will bring up a lot of conflict early on?
I think there'll definitely be some pain points there. Yeah, I think there'll be some points where PTs will go, I saw that person and I don't agree with this. This person isn't at risk for this, or I don't agree. This person was stronger last time. But I think ultimately, it's not going to replace the PT's thinking. There's still that good clinical reasoning and trying to piece together, not like you mentioned earlier, the qualitative factors, not just the quantitative factors. So it doesn't get rid of good clinical judgment, but if anything, there may be some issues with that objectivity kind of coming through too hard, and maybe promotes us to start thinking maybe we're overly weighing these qualitative factors too much. I don't know. But again, I especially with like that hybrid model that we've been talking about, I don't see us throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think if anything, it's just, again, another tool that will help us, not hurt clinical practice. That's not our intention. We want to make clinical practice even better. And so we'd want PTs to realize whatever data they're capturing on our system isn't the end all be all. They still have to do their their systems review, and their other testing measures, and the good history and interview that goes a long way still. And that's verbal, right?
Yeah. And once again, not replacing the PT, but supplementing it and making the profession better, because ultimately this helps the patient out. And that's what we really want at the end of the day. Patients need to get better. And if there is technology that is like telling us that the profession's been doing this wrong for the past 20 years, I would want to know that, because I don't want to keep hurting patients.
Absolutely.
And do you think this is also data, is going to be important for us, but also for other areas of healthcare? For instance, maybe insurance companies will now be dictating visits for patients depending on this information. Is that part of your game plan to move forward with getting involved with insurance companies and making sure that, hey, we got this objective data, they're really not ready yet, or vice versa, that, hey, they're really ready, and so on?
Correct. Yeah. So I think our real initial push will be within that cash environment, work out some of the kinks, and obviously get significant buy-in in that market. Show, and through that process, show our validity and reliability and safety through peer-reviewed publications, and then pivot over and say, okay, insurance, like Blue Cross, what do you think? Medicare, what do you think? Probably our biggest focus right now is that 18, like the 55-year-old. We don't probably want to go right after Medicare, but we know if we get Medicare adoption, like a lot of times the other insurers will fall through. But at this point, it would probably be focusing on just the major third-party insurers to see if they would accept it as a qualified means as telehealth. And that's something we plan to do down the road. As we know, there was a recent approval by most insurers for cognitive behavioral therapy delivered for virtual reality for chronic lower back pain. So obviously that's not a physical sort of tool, but it's still a metaverse tool that is helping someone who has chronic lower back pain, which is something we work with. I work with several patients that have chronic lower back pain. So that's exciting to see that approval. And so we hopefully can kind of keep that momentum going to get more approval in the metaverse.
And do you think that it's going to ultimately lead to better compliance with exercise programs? I know, as every single physical therapist has ever said in their life, that they have patients that don't do their home exercise program. Do you feel like this is an opportunity for patients to improve compliance with their exercises?
Absolutely. So on our dashboard, we'll show, a picture of the patient if they want to submit their picture, name, and then like a short little review of their overall status, which says, on track, doing well, or needs review, or, non-compliant, need contact for an appointment immediately. And so our plan is to integrate our exercise component within the system so that patients can go in, don the headset, go through the movements that we're asking them to do. All right, I'm going to do 5 overhead presses with a dumbbell. And while they're doing that motion, the system can track it. Or if they're not using a dumbbell, they can use, a wrist weight or something to kind of help load them while they're holding the controller in their hand. So as we're watching them do that movement, can we look at the compliance? Yeah. So the PT can go in asynchronously, don the headset, or go to the laptop and say, all right, yep, Mike did his exercises and he did them well, and he did them all the last 3 days in a row. Perfect. He's on track, so he's good to go. So that's our goal, is to improve compliance through that asynchronous ability to see our clients exercising. Are they doing their home exercise program, which is something that most PTs don't have that ability right now, right? We just kind of like send them an email or text, or just next visit go, hey, did you do your homework? And they go, kind of. I did this one or that one. Not sure if I'm doing this one right, but at least our software, you can see not only are they doing it right, and like kind of get a little bit of quality metrics and dive into those numbers, especially if someone's having problems. They're having pain, or they're not responding, right? They're a slow responder instead of a fast responder. You're like, what's going on here? Why is it so difficult for them to get better? I got it. They're not doing this exercise right. They're doing something totally different that I told them not to do. So that's our goal. That's our intentions, really, to cake in the system our exercise program to improve compliance and quality outcomes.
And on the side of implementation, is it going to be, you had mentioned that it could be a hybrid model or it could be completely immersive. Do you believe that it's going to be early on where you come in for your initial visit, you see the physical therapist, and then you said, okay, you can log on during the week and you can do your PT exercises. And then you're going to be doing follow-up care through the metaverse, or is it going to be, you're going to see the PT every 2 weeks? I guess, is there a plan for implementation as a hybrid model, or is it kind of still up in the works in question?
Sure. So we ultimately want to give clinicians the choice to do it however they want to. Obviously, as we are doing studies and I'm implementing some of my research with the team for my own practice, we'll probably advise them and say, look, when we did our own hybrid models, it seemed to work if we met once a week in person, and then like every other week, like 1 week I'm in person, next week it's all virtual. And that worked out well. So hopefully we can advise them based on our own metrics. But ultimately, we don't want to tell PTs and say, like, you have to only be virtual, or all you have to do is hybrid. And when you do hybrid, you have to go on once a month or once a week or whatever, because ultimately it's up to the clinician. And as we talk to some of the PTs at CSM, like some of the soldiers, they get deployed somewhere, they're traveling. Who knows? Are they going to be there like 4 weeks, 2 months? And do we know if a PT is going to be actually there? Because I know the PTs try to go out, but sometimes mobile units and things, they don't have the capabilities to bring the PT in the rear with the gear. So as a consequence, they're sort of like, well, how do I keep up with my compliance with my program with a headset? And so that gives PTs some flexibility while you're deployed. 4 weeks using a headset, I'll be checking on you remotely. You're from base back home. So it gives PTs flexibility in different settings with different patient populations.
And just talking again more about implementation, I know one of the biggest barriers, at least for therapists, is just managing everything on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, let's say you're a business owner and you're trying to, 1, keep the lights on, 2, you're trying to manage patients, 3, you're trying to build a team, 4, you're working on your marketing. And now all of a sudden we need to implement this hybrid model of like, in the metaverse. And so how have you guys tried to be as seamless as possible, or at least starting to think about making it as seamless as possible? So like, here is your product, here is implementation, and maybe there's a small learning curve, but this is going to be not only a tool, but a supplement to what you're already doing.
That's a good question. So at CSM, we surveyed over 200 PTs based on their experiences with telehealth and their experiences with virtual reality. And we were really surprised to see the number of people that responded that they would utilize, I think it was like 87% of PTs said that they would utilize some form of like virtual care within their practice, which I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. And those numbers were even stronger with those that had done our demo with our MVP, because they were like, a couple of them were like, we're totally skeptical of this, like we're going in, and then when they came out on the other end, they're like, this is something I could definitely utilize in my practice. So our hope again wouldn't to be to dictate to a PT like, hey, we expect you to do it this much. It's really up to you. It's kind of like an Uber model, right? You can flex it on when you need it, turn it off when you don't need it. But I think ultimately balancing it out, there'd be like a little bit of that learning process, but a lot of it is also very intuitive. And so I don't think from an administrative standpoint, it's going to take much time away, especially if you're done in the headset and you're looking at another patient. That's billable time right there in terms of like seeing a client. So I don't think it's going to be too much of a barrier for a lot of PTs to implement, especially PTs that have experience within immersive or virtual reality type headsets and things. Now, if someone is very not so tech savvy, it may be a little bit more of a barrier to entry for them, but certainly not something that our team can't, coach them on. And obviously we'll be setting people up for success by, showing developing tutorials and kind of step-by-step process. And at the orientation at CSM at Technopalooza, the beginning portion of our demo, we have an orientation component of the software. So people get used to, this is how you utilize the hand button to tap a button. This is how you put your arms in the air, put your arms in these circles. We kind of walk people through this so they're comfortable within our software, and it's not just like, hey, good luck.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I get it. It's for some people, it can be a lot, and you're looking around and going, "Oh my gosh!" And I can change the environment. So one minute you're in space, next minute you're like on a beach. There's another picture, like on a snow mountainside. So you can imagine you're doing therapy like on the side of like a beautiful mountain with snow everywhere. It's pretty cool, but it can be a lot at first,
Well, sidetrack. I was actually wondering about this. Could you mimic like perhaps sports related things? Like say, for instance, you have a skier and they're like, I notice it only pain when I do this motion or whatever. Do you think we'd be able to get to that point where we can visualize that and see what they're doing?
So I know there's the capability of looking at like a weight shifting and things, and some of the other virtual reality company like Virtualis, they have an entire platform dedicated to like weight shifting, like you're skiing, and they call it VR skiing or something like that. So they have that capability, and I think we can certainly do something to mimic that as well. Now we wouldn't have the platform obviously, but we could still look at weight shifting, force, the torques as well as range of motion, and sort of gather some data from that as well. But yeah, I wish I could say we can mimic everything, but we also have to be careful. Like as we start adding or wanting to add on more equipment, we start seeing costs go up, and we also see that barrier to entry go up, and so we're like trying to keep it nice and minimal and compact as much as we can.
And it's like back to that barrier to entry thing. We want to make it as seamless and transferable as possible, because again, we don't need overwhelmed clinicians trying to adopt this thing. We want it to be a tool and supplementary to what they're already doing and providing great care.
Absolutely.
And on the side of just patient care as well as just clinicians, obviously we're seeing benefits, seeing barriers and things that we're really excited about. However, are there issues maybe, or not even issues, benefits that you may see in the front desk wise, maybe like getting rid of intake forms, getting rid of that entry to the clinic, essentially, where you're saying like, okay, let's just say you were to say, okay, I want you to do like these 6 motions before you come into the clinic, fill out a couple forms, and then when you come in, just come in and you'll see me. Do you think this is starting to get rid of that whole front desk idea, or do you think that's still going to be an essential component moving forward?
I think it will definitely ease some of those pain points with the front desk, because a lot of it will be unfortunately put onto the client to enter their information. Or really, if they're logging in with their headset that's already connected to Meta and their profile, some of that data and information can get pulled over, and they can correct it and change it as needed for their session. So I won't say that's too onerous, as long as they grant the permission to have that handshake and things from a privacy standpoint. If they don't, they can then enter their own information as needed. So I think it will take some of that burden off. Plus, it's going to be most of the data stored in the cloud, right? So in terms of like paperwork and running around, like getting signatures, like there's not going to be any of that. So it's digital consent, digital storage. So that'll be really a perk from that paper pencil standpoint for PTs that are still operating with consent forms that are signing, paper consent forms or paper documentation. It's not going to be that. It's going to be digital. Now, if we do need to send a note or get information out or print out data, we'll have that capability to download like a PDF of like, here's their information, or we need to type up a note. We can print off the range of motion data and then integrate it in with the note to the physician if we have to do that. So yeah, that's our intention, is to reduce some of that front desk staff, but it's probably not our primary goal.
People are scared, maybe they're putting their health information into this database. Should they be concerned with perhaps privacy and having their data like taken or taken advantage of? Or I guess what measures are you guys taking to ensure safety and compliance with data?
That's a valid question, and definitely a concern of ours that we're taking very seriously. What we're looking at doing is partnering with AWS, Amazon's very large cloud service. They have an entire division dedicated to confidential and HIPAA-related material. So we're working into partnership with them to ensure that we have a seamless transition of data back and forth from headset of PT to headset of clinician and back and forth from the cloud. So our one team member, Ash, is working at lengths to do that. And obviously, before we roll this out to the full population and start getting patients onboarded and things, we will obviously bring in a lawyer for review to make sure that all of our policies and procedures are up to snuff so that people are protected. Now, at the end of the day, does that mean 100% no one's going to get hacked? As we see within so many every day, it's like this person got hacked and this large firm got hacked, Deloitte got hacked. I mean, we're talking. Is it completely implausible? No, I don't think we can ever say 0%, but we're doing everything we can within our legal and physical capabilities to keep the data as safe as possible.
Well, certainly make people feel more safe. And like you said, it can never be absolute zero because there's large companies that get hacked all the time. Then, these guys have some of the best software engineers and technical cybersecurity people, and they still end up getting exposed in some aspects. So it's going to be, as long as you guys are doing your due diligence, patients should feel safe, except for the tragedies.
Correct. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And to kind of pivot away from these, the compliance of data and all this other stuff, you had mentioned it's a 3-dimensional world that you're going to be entering into. And there's going to be this PT front, so to speak. It's a clinic that you're going to be able to, quote unquote, walk into. On the side of building community around your clinic, do you believe that this introduction into the metaverse and introduction into a PT clinic is a new way to build community for your clinic? And I suppose how would clinicians think about doing that? Like, are you going to be able to make it look like a PT clinic? Do you want to do that? I mean, are we even able to do that? I guess what does that look like in building community?
Sure. So that's a good question. We have at least 2 major modes that you can operate from as a PT. One is one-on-one. So it's you and the PT working in a room, an environment. So you can the patient can select the environment. It can be sort of a clinic that's sort of in the outer space world, so it's a very sterile kind of environment, or it could be something, warm like the beach, or beautiful like the snow. So they get to choose that environment, whatever works for them. So obviously the PT can work with the person too, especially if someone's sensitive of the environment, like they don't like it, they can switch and toggle through that. And then we have sort of a group area for our lab. So you can have more than one person. So in terms of building community, you could do like group sessions in that lab space and have more than one patient in there. Obviously, again, you just like when you're in skilled nursing, for instance, and you do like a group session, you'd want to make sure that patients are okay. Like, are you okay? Like working like with other people and getting their consent and everything. But that's one way I can see us building community, is having, one PT that's, maybe in the same practice, treating one patient on this side of the clinic, and then one PT on the other side of the clinic treating a patient. And be kind of cool. I think overall that would be a way that there's some interaction and patients can talk to each other and say, hey, what do you think? How's your sessions going? Oh, it's good. So it's not totally isolative, because I know that's one other concern. Some people are like, you're just basically taking out like that community feeling of a gym. And it's like, well, not necessarily, we have that ability to do what we call like a multiplayer, if you will, like having multiple patients in one room at once, if patients want to do that. And if PTs want to do that. If they don't, they have that one-on-one model as well. So for that privacy and the role focused care too. So I hope that answers your question in terms of community.
It does, yeah. And I was just going to ask, like, when is this going to happen? I mean, like, what are you? I know this isn't happening now, but these are all kind of like, foresight related questions where we're thinking about like what does the future look like? I guess. Do you have maybe a time frame or a rough estimate of like when we can actually be seeing this be implemented in clinics across the nation?
We do. Yeah, we have a roadmap, and our plan is to be in PT's hands by 2023. And it's probably going to be summer 2023 because we have our, knock on wood, phase 2 grant should be approved this summer, which will give us more funding to do more research studies to prove validity, reliability, and expand. So like I mentioned, lower extremity and balance. So that would mean we're looking at probably product release like June, July 2023. And then after that, we're just going to continue with improvements. So adding on maybe some of the components you talked about, like with concussion, and enhancing some of our neuro pieces, start building in population data and population type data points to help stratify clients in terms of risk and things. So 2023 for sure, summer, and then just building and getting better by 2024 for sure.
And, this sounds exciting. I kind of want to get your personal opinion on what you're excited for next. Is it the continuation in working with this company to build the best brand possible? Is it something maybe in your own life that you're really excited about? I guess, what are you most excited for next?
Again, I'm going to go back to like when I did the shoulder stuff and I thought that was amazing. I said, I want to see the range of motion data. I'm very impatient. So clinically, I'm like, I want to see lower extremity. I want to see like someone do a squat and be able to go, that's awesome. Look at the knee, instantaneous range of motion on their knee flexion right there. And I don't have to have it. I can toggle it off. But I guess I'm really excited about looking at lower and also interested to see how we expand into spine too, because so much of our patients we see, right, is lower back pain, neck pain. So yeah, I'm really excited about that in terms of, I guess, call me a nerd. I love it. I'm excited.
I'm very excited as well. And especially on the aspect of just like being able to implement both and see people do it at home, or even like, for instance, for sports and athletes, being able to be like, all right, well, you said you've been having pain when you cut or when you kick the ball or something. Why don't you just demonstrate that for me and then see what we feel? And you can get some objective data and bring it forth and do the best that we can and improve patient outcomes, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing everything that you've been working on. We're getting down to the end here, and these are the closing remarks for the podcast. So this is the Health Me to Health You portion of the podcast. And you had a little time beforehand to take a look at the questions. And the first question that I ask everybody, and I'm be asking you, is if you had the attention of everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say?
I would say give respect. I would say treat your other person, your neighbor, your friend, whoever that is, your patient, with respect and love, in hopes that you will get that respect and love back. I'm a firm believer in the golden rule, like whatever you put out in the world, it comes back to you. And yeah, I would really kind of love to bend the ear of everybody, especially right now with some of this stuff we're seeing in the news. It's just, yeah, it's crushing. So I want to share that message. Use the golden rule.
We're going to definitely need more of that moving forward the next couple of months. So hopefully everyone starts practicing it.
Absolutely.
Second question, what book do you recommend, whether a book you're reading now or in the past?
So my dad was in the military, and you're going to laugh, but being a military brat, I was always told this is a book for discipline. It's a book for a lot of people look at it as like a military strategy book, but you can apply so many of these concepts into your everyday life, from discipline to understanding relationships with people. And that's Sun Tzu, Art of War. That book is obviously written by Chinese military experts, but it was a book that when I read it, my dad told me, you got to read this. Every general, every colonel I've worked with, I tell them to read this, and it's eye-opening. But things like instead of using the sword, use your mouth, use your words. simple things like that. It translates well into life, and to the fact of discipline. That's the other component too. I see within my life is I try to be very disciplined with eating well, getting good sleep, and I talk to patients about these things, and it's like, if I'm not doing it, how can I convey this message to you and tell you, like, I need to preach, I need to do what I'm preaching. So I would say Sun Tzu, The Art of War is a good one. That it's a little heavy maybe for some people, but I found that book was really influential in my life. And I read several other books too. Like I'm finishing Alexander Hamilton right now, and I love that book. I think it's amazing to see this young guy go from rags to riches. And he didn't have like a rich white, dad who's a lawyer and like, aristocrat. He built himself up and worked himself, it's kind of that epitome of the American dream. So I like a wide range of books, but that's another book that I'd recommend people read too, is Alexander Hamilton. That one it's long. It's written by Ron Shenron, but he helped advise blanking on his name. I can see his face. The guy who wrote the play, the Broadway show, Hamilton, he helped advise him on the accuracy and things. And that book is also really well written, and I have a lot of respect now for Alexander Hamilton, because he obviously wasn't one of our presidents. But he helped found the Treasury. He helped found the Coast Guard. The amount of impact he had in our life, and the amount of flack he took as being an immigrant, which just was mind blowing to me, particularly with my grandma. She came straight from Italy off of a boat when she was young. And it's like, to see how many generations it takes to kind of work your way up in our country. It's still possible, and it's still cool to see his perspective. So that would be another maybe not so military book for those that are out there.
Yeah, I was actually I read The Art of War, but I'm listening to The War of Art right now, actually, and I've really enjoyed that book. Yeah, I have a harder time reading. Not that I have a hard time reading, but I have a harder time sitting down and actually doing the act. So I like listening to audiobooks, and I find that book's been very influential as well. So I think those are all three of those books are definitely good ones to read or listen to.
Cool, that's awesome.
Last question: where can people learn more about you, Immergo Labs, and so on?
Sure. So they can learn more. I have a Twitter handle. It's Naples PT. I have a website, wellsphysicaltherapy.com, so they can learn more about my practice. I also do continuing education courses focused on PTs for nutrition. That's nutritionalphysicaltherapy.com. You can read a little bit about myself on there too. And for Immergo Labs, you can type in immergolabs.com, IMMERGO labs.com. We also have, I think, a Instagram, which is at Immergo Labs. So you can check out some of the videos and some of our posts from like CSM. We were there, having fun and partying with some of the PTs and stuff. So that was good. And I think that's everything for now. We'll be posting more videos, and we're creating a blog for that website. So we have also a wait list too. We have about 40 PTs on our wait list currently. So we'd love to get more PTs that are interested on their wait list, and we'll be pushing out periodic newsletters and kind of updates on where we're at with our software. And so if PTs are interested, hop on there, sign up for the wait list. We're not going to spam you or sell your information or anything like that. It's just really to keep you in the loop with what we're up to.
I'm one of those 40 PTs that signed up already. So anyone who hasn't done so, you should definitely do it.
Sounds good. Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Sure. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.